Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give just 1 minute for everyone to join us. We have lots of people filing in. It's exciting. Okay. Joining. We have 1 more minute. A few more seconds. Okay. Good. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tiffany Texador, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Educate 360, which is a family of training brands that includes New Horizons, a leading provider of IT training. And today, very honored to have David Cannon, the head of America's region for PeopleCert, here with us. David has created an exclusive 4-part webinar series just for New Horizons to dive into the benefits of ITIL. And he is an expert in IT service management. He literally wrote the book on ITIL. In fact, he's co-authored 4 books on ITIL, in addition to working in the field as a practitioner, consultant, and business executive for over 3 decades, leading ITSM practices in Hewlett-Packard, Forrester Research, BMC Software. So he definitely knows everything there is to know, and we are very excited to have him here. Now, before I hand it over, we are using Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. So we also do encourage participation throughout, so please use the chat or the Q&A option to ask questions while David is presenting, and then we will also have a short Q&A after the presentation. So E360 is so excited to present this webinar today, and I will now hand it over to you, David.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's really good to be here. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to jump straight into the presentation, and this is a 4-part series, and we're going to be talking about ITIL. We really want to focus on not only what ITIL is, but also how it benefits an organization or an individual as they grow their careers. So if you're wanting to know more about how to use ITIL within your organization, if you want to see the value of ITIL to grow your career, then this webinar series is gonna explore all of that. And we're going to kick off today with a relook at the basics of what is ITIL and what does it do. So 4 parts to the agenda today. And the first part is, what is ITIL really? We're hearing so many different definitions and people explaining what ITIL is, but which one of those is real? Which one is true? And what is it really? And to answer that question as well, we're going to have a look at why it was created. If we want to know what value ITIL is going to bring to us, then it's helpful to know why it was created. What kind of problems does it solve? And if we understand what those are, then we know if we're experiencing some of those challenges ourselves in our organization, then we stand a really good chance of being able to use ITIL to help us. I also want to look at what ITIL does, and I also want to look at what it does not do. So we found over the years that people have used ITIL in a variety of ways, and some of those ways work really well. And some of those ways do not work really well. And in fact, they don't work at all. And people then find that they have a negative experience with using ITIL. We want to avoid that. We want to make sure you're getting the value out of ITIL. So what does it do and what does it not do? Let's set the expectations right. Let's make sure you're using it in the right way. And then I want to end off today by looking at some of the benefits of using ITIL. And we've done some research, and there were some really interesting numbers that came out of that research. So I'm going to take a bit of a look at that. Right. So what is ITIL? I mean, really, what is it? Well, here's some frequently used definitions, or FUD, if you like. If you go online and you do a bit of a search, or you get onto social media and you hear people talking about ITIL, you will likely see a number of these components to the definition that's used. So the first one, that it's the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. That's what ITIL stands for, and historically that's correct. However, the term is not used in full anymore. We don't actually refer to the infrastructure library. We really just refer to ITIL. And the reason for that is because ITIL has expanded since it was first created way beyond just managing the infrastructure. So it's really about managing not only infrastructure, but also the teams who manage that infrastructure, also the customers who use that infrastructure, also the applications that run on the infrastructure, also the cloud services that we use in our organization. And so it's not really, it's very limiting to refer to it by its original full name as IT, Information Technology Infrastructure Library. It really is just ITIL today. So that's the first one you'll see. The second one is that ITIL is a description of the processes used to manage IT. And again, there is some truth to this. There are processes described which we can use as we manage IT. However, there is a lot more than just processes in ITIL. In fact, the process content of ITIL is about maybe 25%. The other 75% is all about the organization, the structure of the organization. It's about the people. It's about how to work with partners and suppliers. It's about the kind of information that you're going to need, the kind of technology that you're going to use. So there is a lot more in ITIL than just a documentation of processes. It's a much more robust set of guidance. And we'll look at some of those components as we go through the presentation. The other one that I often see, and it's kind of an interesting one, which is ITIL is a standard for managing IT operations. Sounds really cool, but there's two things wrong with that statement. The first one is that it's not a standard. I know there are some organizations that tend to use it as a standard. So if it's not an ITIL, don't do it, or only do it if it is in ITIL, or if you're going to do it exactly the way ITIL says you should do it. It was never intended that way. Really, ITIL is a set of guidelines. You use them and you apply them to the unique requirements of your organization. Quite honestly, the most successful organizations using ITIL never look the same. They don't have the exact same way of working across all organizations. So you'll find one organization uses some parts of ITIL and they use them very effectively, but they don't use other parts. Other organizations will use different components from ITIL. So it all depends what challenges your organization is facing and how how your organization makes decisions, the culture of the organization. And that will tell you how to apply ITIL. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And the other thing is this IT operations. Yeah, it did start out in IT operations. That's true. Back in the late 1980s, it was aimed at IT operations. In fact, even into ITIL v2 and certainly a little bit into ITIL v3. It really was about just IT operations. But the world has changed. And IT operations happens everywhere in the organizations. It's not just in one IT department. There are many places that you have to manage technology within the organization. And so ITIL has evolved to become a set of guidelines for managing digital technology, no matter where it is in an organization. This is another one, a way of aligning IT with the business. In other words, other business units in the organization. That's cool. And I think there was definitely a time where that was really important. I think in many organizations, that is still an important priority for many IT organizations. But the lines between IT and business units has started to blur a lot more. So 10 years ago, we used to refer to business units who had their own IT initiatives as shadow IT. Today, those business units who are using cloud services, who have developers that are working in their own business unit, who are managing different parts of technology in their own business unit, they're no longer shadow IT. They are, in fact, using digital technology to support their business. And ITIL is relevant to them as well. So yes, it does help centralized IT groups to align to other business units. But also it extends beyond that, and it helps to manage technology that is part of the business. Here's another one, a common language for technical teams. That is, again, all of these have some element of truth to them. It does provide a common language, but it's not limited to technical teams. So when we talk about an IT service, we want to make sure that everybody has the same understanding of what that means. And there's been a number of examples over the years where people have used the word service differently. For example, we have service-oriented architecture. The word service used there is used in a software architecture context is not quite the same as the word service used in when we're providing IT services in an operational environment, for example. So it is important that when we use terms, we understand in what context they're being used and what they mean to the particular group that's using that. And ITIL can certainly help to clarify that. It doesn't mean that you have to replace every single term in your organization with what's in ITIL. But it certainly does help if you're working across multiple organizations or multiple groups in an organization to have one standard way of defining the terms that you're going to be using. ITIL can help to do that, but it's by no means the only way to do that. And in fact, what we find today is that organizations are using both ITIL, or not only both, but ITIL, DevOps terminology, technology related to value stream mapping, and so on. So ITIL contributes towards that vocabulary, and it helps in that process of defining that common language. But it is by no means the only set of terms that is going to be used within an organization. And then finally, the word best practice for managing IT services. And that particular definition has caused quite a lot of difficulty over the years, because it kind of implies that ITIL is the best possible thing that you could ever do for your organization. And actually, that's not quite what best practice means. What that means is that a number of people, in fact, hundreds of people, did research, and they went through a number of organizations, and wherever they found something that worked, they documented it. If it worked in majority of those organizations, it was seen as something that was more scalable, more universal, and therefore was seen as the best of the practices that had been collected. But it still has to be applied to the unique requirements of your organization. So it's an input. It is a best practice in that, it's the best that could be found at the time, but it's not always going to be the best possible thing that you can do for your organization or your career. So I just wanted to position that. Let's try, and that's the negative side. Let's move away from the negative and let's look at a positive definition. Here's a better definition of ITIL and what it means. So first of all, it is a library. Yeah, it's a bunch of books. Some of them are online. Some of them you can buy. You can buy the physical copies of the books, but it is a library of books. And the books are about how organizations can manage digital technology to achieve their objectives. It is not about creating fantastic digital products. It's not about it's not about how to set a strategy for AI necessarily. It's about how to manage these technologies so that your organization can meet the objectives that it set out to when it first wanted to invest in that technology. Also note there, it's about how to manage that technology. It's not about the technology itself. In fact, you'll see in a moment, ITIL is technology agnostic. It's independent of the technology. It applies across whatever types of technology that you're using, because it's not focused on the technology. It's focused on the services that technology is used to provide. So what ITIL does by doing this is it focuses on how organizations create and realize value. Realize value is when you achieve the objectives. Creating is when you set everything in place so that you can achieve those objectives. For many organizations, value is financial. For other organizations, it relates to other objectives, which may relate to social responsibility or environmental concerns. But anything that is valuable to that organization, achieving those objectives, that's what ITIL focuses on. It focuses on what your organization is hoping to achieve by using technology. ITIL does not only cover processes, it focuses and prioritizes approaches that combine people, the partners that we work with, automation, and the processes, information that we need to use, and so on. So it prioritizes approaches that are bigger than just a tool or bigger than just a process. It wants to look at it, wants to help implement approaches or use approaches that draw on all of these resources, all of these capabilities at the same time. And it provides guidelines on how to do that. The other thing is that ITIL is based on service management principles and practices. It is not primarily around building IT products like applications. It's not about, for example, application development and design. It is about how we manage the services that are provided when we have those products. So if we invest in a particular application or a suite of applications, how do we make sure that we're using those applications? How do we make sure that we're managing those applications in a way that we can achieve the objectives? And we do that by managing services. Now, I've just said that there are products involved, and that's very true. So ITIL recognizes the fact that there are both products and services within an organization, but it primarily focuses on the services side and how to interface and integrate with the product management approaches as well. So there is nothing in ITIL which says you should only use ITIL. In fact, ITIL is strongest when you're combining a service management approach with the product management approach. But ITIL focuses primarily on the service side of that equation. It does actually keep up to date with emerging practices. So you may have heard and seen there's a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt being sown out there. And you may read the message, oh, ITIL has been around forever, it's old-fashioned. ITIL comes from a different age when all you had to do was use processes. Nothing could be further from the truth. That was true back then, but ITIL has evolved. We're now in ITIL 4. ITIL 4 looks, as I'll show you in a moment, ITIL 4 looks way beyond just how do we put processes in place? How do we work with mainframes and client-server technology? It's moved way beyond that. It now incorporates the emerging technology as it arises. I say we're in ITIL 4, and if this was a live thing and you all had live microphones, I would ask, so when was the latest version of ITIL released? And I'm sure a number of you would say, well, ITIL 4 was released about 2018. And the DITS book was the last one to be published. That was in 2020. And you would be right, except that all of the practice guides, 34 practice guides, half of them were refreshed at the end of last year, and the other half are going to be released and totally refreshed at the end of this year, which means that ITIL is continuously being kept up to date with how the industry is evolving, with how digital technology is being used in the organization. And here's the last one. This is one of my favorites, that ITIL, as part of the definition, documents common sense. I often hear when we talk about ITIL and people look at what's inside ITIL and they say, but hold on, this is all just common sense. And my answer to that is that, contrary to the words, common sense is neither common nor very often sensible. So we find that when you talk about common sense, everybody has their own definition about what is common sense. And very often some of those definitions are not sensible at all. They come out of something that happened years ago, and we've kind of just moved and embedded that in our belief system. Well, common sense, as it turns out, takes a lot of work to identify what most people understand as being sensible. and what is really sensible. So ITIL actually filters through all of those belief systems, filters through all of those experiments about what people have thought was common sense or not common sense, and it figures out which of those things work and which don't work, and then it documents it. The end result is you've got something that looks pretty much like common sense, but when you really look at it, it's actually quite unique. So I want to get past this little bit of theory that we've covered here, a little bit of history and so on. And I want to look more at ITIL itself and what problems it solves. And to do that, I want to look at the way in which ITIL has changed over the years. And bear with me because it seems like a bit of a history lesson, but actually it's pretty interesting because it tells us the different ways in which ITIL has been used. And some of those may apply to you. Some of them you may have moved beyond those, but let's have a look at those. So what we have in the very beginning, before there was any ITIL, the job of the IT department was primarily, and this is specifically IT operations, which is where ITIL was first used. And the job of the IT department was to manage technology. So where did you find out how to manage that technology? You went to the vendor manuals. The vendors would give you a system management guide. They would give you an administration guide. They would give you a user guide. And you would study those and you would apply those within your environment. And that was what we had to as guidance to manage our IT environments. It wasn't enough because what we found is that as good as the vendor guides were, they didn't take into account the unique situation of our own organization. And so along comes the UK government and it produces ITIL. That's where it came from. It came from the UK government. And ITIL version 1 was all about, great, we've got all these systems, we've got great applications running on those systems, but they still fail. So how should we really manage IT operations? And that was the question asked by version 1. How do we manage IT operations? Over time, we got better and better at managing IT operations, and we began to learn that operations work best when they're managed as services. So through ITIL v1 and then through ITIL v2, we focus on IT as a department that delivers services to internal customers. The first question was, how do you manage IT operations? It then developed into, how do we deliver quality services? Great. Quality services means they're predictable, they're the same, we can measure them, and they're available, they perform well. That's fantastic. Interestingly, the question that was not asked back then is, okay, but do they actually meet a business need? Yeah, sure, it's what the customer asked for, and we're delivering it according to the level of quality that was promised, but does it actually help the business to achieve its objectives? So to answer that question, ITIL v3 was written, and ITIL v3 asked the question, when we deliver services, are they valuable to the business? How do we make sure that we can deliver services that are not only good quality, but they actually help the business to achieve its objectives? But here's the interesting thing. In ITIL v1, v2, and v3, they were written primarily around a very centralized IT department that was providing operational services to internal business units. That was how they were written. The world has changed, as I've said, and ITIL 4 takes into account that every business unit in an organization has an element of its business operations embedded in digital technology. And many of those business units are managing their own digital technology solutions. For example, they've bought solutions in the cloud. So we had to answer the question in ITIL 4, not only how does an IT department deliver good quality services that meet business objectives, but how do we help the business units that are using digital technology to manage that technology effectively and achieve value from that technology, especially because that technology changes so quickly. And the role of IT has evolved. What we find now is that IT is not only a department that delivers services, but it is also an organization that brokers capabilities from multiple service providers, some of them inside the organization and some of them external. Not only that, but in ITIL 4, we recognize the fact that many users and many managers of technology are managing technology that is embedded in the business itself. So how do we achieve this? How do we manage technology that is managed by the IT department, but we also have to manage technology that is embedded in the business unit and that is being managed by a business unit lead who doesn't necessarily have the same background and technology expertise that the IT department has. How do we do all of that at the same time? So what I want to show you there is that ITIL is a really good way of keeping track with how the industry is evolving. And it really helps professionals like you and I in the industry to keep pace with the practices as those practices evolve, as the type of management systems evolve within the organizations that you work in. Some of you on this call will find yourself being more towards the IT broker's capability model. Some of you may still be working in an IT organization that is a service provider inside the organization. Nothing wrong with that. That's going to be there for a long time, and it's really important to be able to manage the situation in that way. So does that mean you have to go back to ITIL v1? No. What it means is that ITIL 4 enables you to manage both from the scenario where you are an IT department delivering services internally, all the way through to a scenario where you have business embedded IT solutions. So what problems does ITIL solve? Well, I've listed some of those that are fairly common, and I'm going to show you exactly how ITIL can be used to solve those problems. So the first problem is instability and downtime. And you just, I mean, we're told these days that technology is just so advanced that it looks after itself and you don't have to worry about it. But if you read the newspaper or your favorite web news source, on any given day, you will find an example of a major system failure somewhere in the world, either because a change happened or because some critical component failed or because somebody had forgotten to update something. Even the best systems fail. Even the most well-crafted, well-designed, most functional, valuable systems in the world fail. And when that happens, you have to be able to do something about it really quickly before your organization loses money and gets into the newspapers or online news sources. So when this happens, business operations are disrupted. And you'll also find in organizations where there's a lot of instability, you'll find that the technical people in that organization are constantly firefighting. They're constantly reacting, and they never or rarely get the time to focus on those proactive activities of, documenting their standard operating procedures and all the stuff we're told we should be doing. We don't get to that because we're constantly being called away to fix something that is broken or to help somebody that doesn't know how a service works. The other thing that happens in these environments is that we keep getting caught off guard because something we don't know about has caused an issue. We weren't aware that it was an issue, and we weren't even aware that there was a problem. I mean, for example, simple stuff, and this happened just this year. An organization that I was working with suddenly realized they weren't getting any email, and they paid no attention to it at first. Seems like that happens every now and again, but after 2 days, it began to be a problem. And they then realized that the internet service provider they were using had reset something, and all the domain name tables had been set to default values. They didn't even know that was a possibility. As far as they were concerned, they'd done the configuration and that was it. But here, all of a sudden, an unknown element, and it took them 2 whole days to figure out that that's what happened. Unpredictable issue, unpredictable thing, because it was just an unknown element. Nobody knew about it. Another example, big healthcare environment lost all of its imaging software. imaging software. Well, it doesn't really sound like a major IT deal. Well, actually, if you think about it, every X-ray machine, every MRI machine, every ultrasound scan, everything that involves imaging is affected by this. In effect, the hospitals could not do any of that kind of activity. And it took, again, this took 3 days to solve. 1 day to kind of realize that the problem was as big as it was. Second day to get all the vendors of all the different equipment into the same room. And the third day to find out that somebody had retired and that person was responsible for renewing a digital certificate. And it wasn't documented. So nobody knew it had to be done, and the person had retired, so they weren't there to analyze what had gone wrong. So at the end of the third day, after 3 days of everybody spending valuable time trying to fix this thing, it was an unknown element. It was something that nobody was aware of because it just hadn't been documented. It just wasn't in a system anywhere. It wasn't referred to anywhere. And yeah, that can cause major instability and downtime. And again, these are things that have happened, in my personal experience, in the last year. So we're not talking about things that go back 50 years. Oh, those are the old days when IT was unstable. We're still talking about situations where there is instability and downtime in extremely modern systems. Change can be disruptive. Again, if you look at many of the articles that come out about downtime, about disruptions to major companies, you'll find that probably in about 70% of those times, it was somebody who'd made a change and didn't realize that the change they were making impacted something else. It can be very disruptive. And when this happens, what you'll find is that over time, the role of the IT department starts shrinking. Whereas you may have been involved in some big projects, you were involved in some business decision making, you were consulted on bringing in new systems, you were part of the project that did that. Over time, you'll find that if systems are unstable, your role shrinks. You're not included in those decisions anymore because people are expecting you simply to go around fixing problems and answering how-to questions like, how do I replace paper in the printer, et cetera, et cetera. Trivial stuff that we really shouldn't be worrying about, but that's kind of what people are depending on us for because there's been so much instability and downtime. That's what people are expecting us to do. It's not a good position to be in. So what we want to do is figure out how to use ITIL to help us solve this issue. Okay, if you're in this situation, the first thing you have to do is recognize that you need good technology managers. So you need people who understand the technology that is being used. If you're in a cloud environment, you need good cloud architects. If you're in a networking environment, you need good networking specialists. For example, you need good Cisco specialists if that's who you're using. Whatever technology it is that you're using, you need to have really good technology management. That's great. And I think most organizations really understand that. They invest in that. But it's the things that you build on top of technology management that are really going to make the difference. The first thing we need is good configuration management. What does that mean? Well, it means you need to know where everything is. You need to know what it looks like. And you need to know which things fit together with other things. How do you do that? Well, the answer to that question is provided in the ITIL practice guide about configuration management. And then we need to build another few things. You need a good service desk. Where do people report when there is a disruption? How do we coordinate the activity when there's a disruption? We need to have good incident management here on this side over here. How do we coordinate activities across multiple teams to resolve those incidents and restore service? Helpful to have good monitoring and event management because if that's in place, you can pick up those disruptions as soon as they happen, and sometimes even before they happen. There are warning signals that you can pick up. So having a good monitoring and event management capability in place is going to be really good. Something else that will help you could be problem management. What is causing these incidents, and can we remove those causes over time and reduce the overall number of incidents as we improve the quality of the products and services we use. Change enablement. How do we make sure that we can make changes without disrupting the organization? So if you are facing an incident of disruption and instability in the digital technology that you use, here's a really good combination of practices. Now, it's not the only combination. This is a good combination, but depending on your organization and what is in place and what tools you have, you may need to vary the combination of practices that you use and when you use them and so on. So this is just an example, but it shows us how we can use components of ITIL to build on the strong technology management skills that we have to be able to increase stability and the stability and the availability of our IT services, our digital technology. Here's another example of a problem or a set of problems that we can face. Poor quality services. So we've got great, we got a great infrastructure, great network, we've got great cloud services, but somehow our business users just don't seem to be getting what they need. We find very often that product teams, for example, applications or other types of systems, have very good design in place and they develop really good products. But sometimes those requirements are not communicated to the other groups who are involved in delivering the IT services. There may be poor performance because we're running multiple products. So each product was designed for peak performance on its own, but when you bring them all together, well, that may have a different performance. So how do we manage that performance? We find sometimes that work can get lost between teams. So, for example, just look at your new hire onboarding process. And I've had some experience again in the last year of organizations where you have one group that orders the, that says our new hire is going to be joining and make sure they have a desk. You have another group that makes sure that their equipment is ordered. You have another group that configures that equipment, and you have a fourth group that actually gives it to the new hire on the day that they join and trains them on how to use it. And if there is a lack of communication between any one of those groups, the new hire onboarding process fails. And invariably, we find that's one of the weak spots in many organizations because work is getting lost between the teams. Could be that it's difficult to prioritize activities. We have everybody wanting everything all at once. Well, we can't do everything all at once. If we make the wrong decision, then people are not getting the service that they're looking for. We find activities and tools are being duplicated across teams. And very often in these organizations, we find that the quality of service is poor because the IT team is doing a really good job of keeping their systems and their products working really well, but somehow they don't realize that those systems are being used by somebody in the organization in a way that may be different than the way we think they're using it. And so sometimes we don't give them the support they need. The services may not always be available when they're needed because somebody may have wanted to use it at an odd time. Okay. All right. I see a couple of notes in the chat saying this was only going to be half an hour, but it is in fact an hour long. I would suggest if you only have half an hour, we'll send you a note on how to get the recording, and please do listen in on the second half of this. So I do apologize for any miscommunication there, but we're going to see how we solve these poor quality service issues. And for example, here are some practices in ITIL that can be used to help us do this. So let's get better ways of managing suppliers and coordinating what they do. Let's look at the service catalogs and which services we're offering and who uses them and when they use them. And let's get a really good understanding of how those services are consumed and how they're delivered so we can get them working even better. Knowledge management. And I know many people use knowledge management to support their service desk and incident management, but actually knowledge management is far broader than that. We can use knowledge management to talk about and to learn about how users are using services and the value that they're achieving from using those services. So that can really help inform us about the expectations that that people have of using services. And then things that help us to predict how we can best manage the performance and availability of services, capacity and availability management, all capped off with some service level management, where we actually commit to particular levels of service, particular levels of experience that our users and customers are expecting from us. So again, this is just an example of how ITIL can combine a number of different resources, different practices, which help us to understand how we can use people, process, partners, technology, all together to solve this problem of quality services. A third problem, and I'll be really quick on this one, IT does not meet business needs, either because those needs are not communicated well, or because there's a disconnect between the product teams and service teams. IT may not have been involved in the business decisions and just gets expected to deliver. IT is too focused on back office activities, like managing the network without knowing exactly who's using the network. And then inconsistent approaches to securing digital assets. What I mean by that is that every time somebody goes and acquires a cloud service, there's a different quality management, a different security management approach that may be used. Some people don't even think about security when they order a new service in the cloud. Other people are very rigorous about security. And then we have all of these multiple approaches to security around the organization. And that could definitely cause some issues. So how do we solve this? Well, here's another example. Strategy management helps us to understand the overall needs of the organization, where the organization is using digital technology and how they're using it and why they're using it. These three, relationship, portfolio, and IT financial management, help us to quantify what that strategy means, how it's actually going to work, who the stakeholders are, who's going to pay for this, what return are we getting on that investment. And then security and risk management helps us to solidify a consistent approach across the organization. Again, an example of how ITIL can help to solve some of those issues. Problem 4, great, we've got all of this in place, but people still don't get the value of IT. We're still seen as a cost center. And meantime, we're really adding a lot of value. How do we measure that? How do we report that? How do we make sure that we're not just focusing on getting new functionality and then finding that functionality doesn't really work when it's released? The way we do this, for example, here's another way in which ITIL can do this is we take all of the layers that we've already implemented, the technology, the operational service management, those tactical service management, and then the strategic management, and we consistently measure and report across all of them and identify continual improvement measures to make sure that we're keeping up with what the business is expecting us to do. So just some examples of all of the problems that ITIL can help to solve. It's not just about getting a better service desk. It's not just about getting better response to when things fail. It's about how to make sure that your investment in technology, that your managers of technology are really growing and providing value at every level. So what does ITIL not do? And what does it do? Here's what it does. So what we do in ITIL is we research management approaches that have been effective. We document those approaches in a consistent format, and then we explain in ITIL how other organizations can benefit from the lessons learned by the organizations that were researched. Now, again, we don't just give prescriptive guidance. We don't just say, if you want to do incident management, you have to do these 5 things. No, it's here's what works in incident management. Now, think about your organization. Which of those 5 things is going to apply to you? And if they do apply to you, how are you going to adopt them to your organization's unique requirements? That's what ITIL does. So it provides an approach to evaluate and adopt emerging technologies. And a lot of people are saying, oh, AI, we've got to have an AI agenda. We've got to have an AI strategy. ITIL needs to tell us what the AI strategy should be. AI, well, ITIL doesn't focus on a particular technology, but what it does do is it helps you to create an approach to evaluating that technology and how it's going to be used in your organization. So what activities does AI typically help us with? Which activities does it support? Which activities does it replace through total automation? Let's identify those and let's figure out how to introduce AI to manage each of those areas in the correct way. But it's not going to tell you, hey, you should use this AI tool for that and that AI tool for that. ITIL won't do that. The AI vendors will certainly give you a lot of information about that. But ITIL will help you to evaluate the claims of those AI vendors as it relates to what your organization does today and what it needs. The other thing that ITIL does is it equips technology experts, people that really have a good, solid understanding of the technology used in the organization, and it gives those professionals additional capabilities that helps them to be more effective as professionals, as individual contributors, but also as managers and executives within their organization. What it does not do, as I've said, ITIL does not teach us how to manage specific technologies. It also doesn't tell you which ITIL components you should implement and in what sequence. So I've given you some examples of typically how you could combine practices. Those may not be the right practices for your organization, and you may want to implement them in a different sequence. You may already have them partially in place. So every organization is unique. The whole point of ITIL is you have guidelines that you can apply, and they'll tell you how to evaluate what you've got in place right now and which practices are going to be effective for you. ITIL will not forecast into the future. A lot of people will expect that, but ITIL is, as I mentioned before, a so-called best practice. What it means is it focuses on things that are working in the industry today. It doesn't focus on trying to predict and guess what's going to happen in the industry in 5 years' time. So it's an experience-based guidance and not a prediction. It does help you to put in place approaches and methods that can help you to evaluate how technology is going to change and how you should respond to that, but it doesn't actually do the forecasting for you. There are research companies that do that. Again, does not define strategies for emerging technologies. It will define strategies for how you evaluate emerging technologies, but it does not evaluate the technologies themselves. And again, I've covered this already, but it does not set a standard that organizations must meet. It is a set of guidelines, and you can adopt them as needed for your organization. So benefits of using ITIL. And we did some research. This was last year, 1,500 different organizations. We interviewed the budget holder of the IT group. So these were not ITIL people necessarily. Some of them were, but they didn't have to be to answer this. But they were all people who had decision-making responsibility, and they were people who managed the budgets within their organization. So these were not estimates. These were based on real numbers. And what we did is we asked what the benefits of ITIL were. And you'll see them listed there. I'm not going to read through them one by one. But you'll see some significant benefits achieved by organizations who used ITIL. And they range. What was interesting is, when we talk about ITIL, we often think about, oh yeah, that makes our IT operations better. Yes, there was an improvement in IT operations, but interestingly, there was improvement in business operations. There was improvement in the way in which organizations worked with partners. There was improvement in the way organizations innovated. So these were really interesting results because they showed us that ITIL was being used in organizations, not just for the traditional things of, managing IT operations and IT infrastructure, but they're being used in ways which help organizations to embrace new and emerging technology effectively. So I want to just call out three of the benefits. And something interesting happened as we did this research. As the results came back and we analyzed them, we realized that it wasn't just, hey, if you use ITIL, you get these benefits. If you don't use ITIL, you don't get these benefits. It wasn't as simple as that. What we learned is that organizations who did not use ITIL at all didn't get a benefit, and in some cases, they declined. In this case, for example, ongoing business operation, 9% of organizations actually decreased their operational continuity of their business. So we had a decline in quality. Organizations that had introduced ITIL, but had not really matured it, they just introduced it, achieved 11% improvement or just stayed the same. It was only once those practices had become a little bit more well-entrenched, well-used within the organization, that we really started to see the benefit. So here at the established and optimized phase, this is where the big benefits really start to happen. So I know there's a lot of people who say, yeah, I've got my ITIL foundation, I'm good. Yeah, you are good, but you'll get even more benefit as you extend the use of ITIL beyond just the foundation into some of the individual practices that I mentioned earlier, and you get them really entrenched in the organization where they're really making a difference. So the real benefit of ITIL happens usually within probably the first 6 to 18 months, and even better over 5 years. Here's another one. Improve. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go right past that one because I just duplicated the slide. Improve the quality of IT services. So here we see with no ITIL, services pretty much stay the same. With ITIL introduced, so it's performed, and we're kind of managing, we are managing it, we'll improve the quality some. But as we firmly establish those practices as part of the organization's culture, as we're optimizing it, we're getting that huge drive in benefits, that huge improvement in the quality of IT services. So the message here is, it's not just ITIL, it's the way you use ITIL. It is, which practices are you using? And are you really using them effectively to change the way in which your organization works? So, just in conclusion, ITIL is designed to build on technical skills and knowledge. Technical skills and knowledge are absolutely critical. There's no question about it. But our experience is, and again, my personal experience, is that it is even better when we supplement it with these skills that have to do with how technology is used within an organization to achieve that organization's objectives. Organizations will get benefit from ITIL because they can ensure that technology services meet business objectives. They'll use ITIL to facilitate communication and collaboration between teams. And they'll use ITIL to make sure that they are managing risk within the organization. But it's not just organizations that benefit from ITIL, it's individuals like you and I as well. It helps us to set career growth objectives. I can point to a number of people who have just built their entire career based on growth achieved by using ITIL, along with other approaches as well. But making sure that that is part of our career growth objective. We're not just going to become good at what we do today, but we're going to grow our capabilities into new areas over time, and ITIL helps us to do that. A really good thing about ITIL is, when you're a good technology professional, you can say, I'm really good at managing this technology, and everybody says, that's fantastic, it's what we expect. But what ITIL helps you to do is to demonstrate the value of that. Yes, I'm good at managing this technology, And that's a good thing because this is what it does for the organization. If I was not doing it, this is what would happen in the organization. And ITIL helps you to quantify those things. That's very helpful when you are either looking to grow your career in an organization or where you're wanting to move to a new organization. It helps you become more effective as a technical specialist. And for some people, ITIL has been a very helpful tool to help them move into a management role. ITIL is not only used by people to move into management roles, but it is a key set of capabilities. The ITIL knowledge and the skills that you get from applying ITIL are very key to careers in management. Now, just a preview of the next webinar, and then I'm going to just give you some information about some upcoming courses. In the next webinar, that is in 2 weeks' time, July 25th, we're going to delve into, today was more just a general thing about what is ITIL, what problems would it use to solve, why is it such a good thing? In the next webinar, we're going to look into this whole thing of value. Value is a really key differentiator. So many IT departments are managed as cost centers. And the thing with cost centers, when you're a cost center, what you're doing is you're communicating what your budget is, how much money you're spending. And then everybody in the organization says, whoa, you're spending so much money. Let's reduce your budget. Well, we don't want that to happen. What we want is to show the organization how we're contributing to value, how we're helping them to achieve objectives, how we are a valuable member of the business community of our organization. So how do we use ITIL to do that? And that's what we're going to focus on next week, in 2 weeks' time in the next of these series. So I'm going to end it there. I see there are no questions in chat. So
Thank you so
there you
much,
are.
David. This was very,
Thank you,
very
Tiffany.
informative. And if there are any questions, we have about 3 minutes, so we can take one or two. And in the meantime, I'm going to drop the link to the webinar series in the chat. So please stay tuned and register for the upcoming 3. And as I mentioned, we will be sending out a recording for all the attendees of this webinar, and if you missed anything or you want to share it. So thank you so much. Thank you, David, and everyone for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Tiffany. And just a reminder to everybody, here are some upcoming foundation courses. If you would like to register, just to know these are guaranteed to run. So if you register for these, please do, and you will be guaranteed to run. So you will get up to speed as soon as July 31st to August 3rd.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone.